I think this is one that affects an awful lot of the participants in today's call. So that question is, how are you managing the conversation around multi-cloud? And I am going to go to Gavin. You knew it was coming your way first. I'm going to go to you for this one first.
Yeah, no, cool. Thank you. So, it's a great question. And there's two, I suppose there's two flavors on this. One is, you could say, multi-cloud with SaaS and products. So things like Google Suites, Office, and so forth. I'm not really going to focus on that. I'm actually going to focus more on the infra side of things. For us, in booking transport, we actually started out our cloud journey by actually trying to be multi-cloud agnostic. So we were using things like technology like Kubernetes to go, multi-cloud. And we found that we've had reasonably good success actually, where we've been able to build, use consistent technologies that can be applied across both. But actually, what we found is more of late is to not be multi-cloud based, to have more of a service-orientated architecture where we use services, microservices. And for me, the question really isn't necessarily about multi-cloud. It's go as fast as you can with the teams, use the leverage of the capabilities, but then actually have a true interop. So using sort of maybe API gateways, so Amazon has one, Google has Apogee and things like this. So it's the interop for me is more important than necessarily the multi-cloud, should we say. So how do you connect services? And for me, that's what the web is about. A lot is around interoperability and standards. And I think a lot of, especially sort of C-level directors, worry about being cloud lock-ins and these. And really for me, it's that interop is more important.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Matthew, do you see this in the ways that you're working? Because obviously from a data perspective, you're required to connect in all over the place. What does that mean for you guys?
Yeah, it's definitely a huge trend. And when we speak to CIOs, chief data officers, other people responsibility for cloud strategies, it's either top of mind or very close to top of mind. And we also see it across other ISVs as well. To see how that's played out with our company, we make a range of products called Matillion ETL. We got into doing that because we used to do data analytics for companies kind of as a service. We needed tools and we built one, and that then became our company. And our background had been on Amazon Web Services as our cloud. So when we launched our products, it was built for Amazon Web Services and built for one of their products in turn, Amazon Redshift. Today, we have Matillion ETL for Amazon Redshift, for Snowflake on AWS, Snowflake on BigQuery, on Azure, all of the three major cloud platforms and all of the services within we support. And that wasn't to increase total addressable market. It was because companies are less likely to buy your products if you only support one of the clouds because they're worried about multi-cloud. So, why should we be worried about multi-cloud at all? I don't think it's because you necessarily need to be worried about it now. It's because you don't want to paint yourself into a corner, in my view. The world's kind of been conditioned by the Oracle experience last time round, and we all became addicted to Oracle and built into it and then couldn't move away and didn't like the experience going forward. The other reason you might want to be thinking about multi-cloud is because whilst the three major clouds broadly offer the same sets of services, some are better at some things than others, and so you might want to pick and choose. So how do you achieve it? I think it's fine to just be on one cloud, right? But you don't want to make technology choices that lock you into it forever. Gavin mentioned Kubernetes. You could use a cloud platform proprietary container service. Instead, the trouble is when you came to move, it would then be difficult. So my advice would be, think about not painting yourself into a corner. Think about making technology choices on the cloud platforms or with ISVs like ourselves or Snowflake or many hundreds of others. Make sure that they support multiple clouds as well. And that just gives you optionality downstream.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matthew. That's I think that resonates a fair bit with what we see as well by talking with clients. Angela, what do you see in the market from a transformation standpoint yourself? Surely this question must come to you a fair bit as well.
All the time. In fact, it becomes less about even multi-cloud as a hybrid environment. So especially if you're in the middle of the transformation, you're going to be on-prem for a number of years, as well as being in the cloud. So it becomes, you know, if you do embrace that service, it becomes less a question of the technology and more a question about a little bit more about the governance. So what are your controls and how do you manage the security between all of those and that governance? And we found kind of embracing that, I guess, minimum viable compliance standard where you can kind of branch all of those and then see what you need specifically around it. And the same comes from the pipeline, from that DevOps perspective of instead of managing, you know, 3 different pipelines, if you have a couple different clouds plus on-premise, you really look at kind of one pipeline and then look at what you have to do from an exception standpoint when you look at the different platforms of technology.
Yeah, okay. So, it certainly sounds like people are thinking about this from a de-risking themselves. This feels like it's a place, like to Matt's point there about not backing yourself into a corner. But with that, what does that mean then to the organization from an upskilling standpoint, right? When we start thinking about what we want to do as an organization, the way that we roll these things out, I suppose one of the questions that, again, we come across quite often is, you know, how difficult is it to upskill people and change the way that they work? And how do we approach that? What challenges do we face? Again, Angela, can I come to you for that one from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely depends on where you are in your transformation. If you're just starting out, then you're probably likely at kind of that pilot stage and really working with, you know, some individual teams and making sure that you're understanding what it does mean. And that's where I like to really use those kind of first initial forays to help develop what the change should be or what the change could be for the broader organization, but really making sure it's purposeful. You know, if you kind of just kind of happenstance into it, I find that a lot of times we develop some of those services and develop some of that backbone, but then if we're not working with the downstream teams, those application teams to consume it, it becomes a build it and then they don't actually come. It's more of build it with them and then train with them as you're going and then they actually come along the journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Gavin, how's it been for you in terms of upskilling, changing ways of working? Sort of problems did you encounter?
Yeah, so there's a number of different lenses I would look at this, right? First is that, I mean, culture, a lot of it is around people and culture and how we want to operate. And where I've seen a lot is that people try to lift and shift into cloud. That doesn't work. So you've got to educate people about that elastic nature of the cloud. Sort of designing, building for the cloud is very, very different. And also it depends on sort of the size of the transformation. So what we've done in our business is, you know, we've hired people in with skills and so forth. We've done sort of training programs and things. And where sort of some of the earlier bits, you know, as Angela was talking around some of those pilots and things, we tried stuff, we failed on stuff. You keep iterating on it. You need to have the right governance, which also helps with some of that lock-in around the right frameworks, and try to not sort of be too sort of bespoke and over engineering. But the other thing that we've seen more of late is actually building out the developer tooling and the platforming and so forth. So how do we make it easier for people to onboard and use the platform and so forth, and put some standards and governance across it? I mean, it depends on the size of the organization, but, you know, I suppose in my world, I've got, you know, over 80 odd teams and things and varying different. So trying to do it at scale, you've got to have some of those things and take the pain away from developers and things. And so we have sort of some what we call cloud enablement teams, who are like embedded infrastructure teams that work with different groups to work and pair and partner. So a lot of pairing, a lot of work, and a lot of enabling the right sort of teams and just learning.
Yeah.
Lots of it.
No, that's really interesting. I've just picked your build for the cloud quote. Just makes me think, Matthew, about the work that you guys do as, you know, you're digitally native, working and operating in the cloud with what you've got as a tool set. Is this something that you see as well in terms of upskilling, that there's a whole host now of of new technologies, new ways of working that is part of the work that you have to do to help with the democratization of data analytics, etc.?
Yeah, and thanks for sort of framing the question that gave me half a chance of being able to answer it sort of semi-residently, Martin, because of course, unlike Angela and Gavin, I don't work either with or for an end user that's kind of going through this migration themselves, but we do see people moving to the cloud as they work with our technology or that of other actors in the ecosystem. So I had a couple of points that might be semi-useful, which was to say that I think in the data space, at least where we know, many of the skills are actually quite transferable. We make data integration tools. The prior generation of those data integration tools from people like IBM, Oracle, Informatica, those skills are super relevant still in the cloud world. What you find is you take the same guy or girl and you give them technology that, yeah, it looks a bit shinier and it's probably browser based, but it's essentially the same constructs and computer science. It's just 10 or 100x more powerful and faster. And so you take the same person and just make them much more powerful and effective to drive change and innovation across your business. So that was one angle that we see a lot and think about. And the other one I just mentioned real quickly is that I think cloud is ultimately about allowing businesses to compete faster. In the data space, a phrase we use is allowing people to compete with data at an accelerated rate. And you know, why do people compete with data? They want to understand their business better, service their customers better, build better products. The cloud gives you a platform or an active site to do that on. So it's creating a vacuum in the global economy. If you don't compete faster, your competitor will, and ultimately you'll lose out. So being that you're on a level playing field with your competitor, he or she can use the cloud and so can you. What else can you do to go faster? Well, coming back to skills, you can get more people into the pass rush. What we see a lot is the IT guys go on the journey, but increasingly so do the business people, the citizen data professionals, and increasingly IT becomes a service provider, you know, making sure it's secure and performant and durable and available, putting the guardrails in place and the enablement in place. But the actual business innovation, you know, making that product better, understanding that customer better, that's increasingly being done by the business, who are closer to the business problem, but also there's just more of them, right? And so they can compete faster in that global competition to innovate at an accelerated rate. How do you do that? You provide skills that are commensurate to business users, and IT become the service provider. The other thing I would say, and this is going to sound a bit cheesy when I'm on a call with my friends at Slalom, but what we see almost with a 100% pattern match to companies doing this well is making great use of the ecosystem, particularly with consulting partners, right? Get some people in that have done it before. So that could be Slalom, I guess it could be others as well, but that is an accelerant that we see.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matthew. No, I think that is true. I think a lot of organizations still continue to consider trying this themselves, but sometimes the challenge just needs a little bit of expertise just to keep it moving in the right direction. And we touched a little bit there on the types of changes and transformations that organizations are making and that of the business. But I suppose I'd like to draw it a little bit closer to a little bit of a question around budget. And the new way of working relies upon a leadership team to take a slightly different approach to agreeing to sign off on things. Because when we work in an agile way and the way that we're working within the cloud, sometimes what we're going to get at the end of these programs and sprints and activities, we can't just put our finger on it right then because the whole iteration process is quite different. So we're asking the leadership team to make a bit of a leap of faith for us. And I was wondering, you know, what was it that was helping convince budget owners that moving to the cloud is worth that effort and they're going to get the return on their investment? And Gavin, again, I'm going to come to you because I bet this question has been thrown around a couple of times at booking, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it has. And I think, I mean, to start with anything, it's around trust. So, you know, the leadership team, the finance teams, different business people need to have trust in the teams who are delivering. And the challenge with cloud is, and you see this a lot, is that people worry around, well, it's kind of a pay-as-you-go service. How do you keep the governance? How do you keep the controls? So there is a big sort of change in mindset in terms of making sure that you've got that right level of control in place, because you could easily sink a lot of money by not turning servers off. And when I talked earlier about designing for elasticity and all these kind of things, it's thinking around the cloud in the right kind of way. I mean, when I come to some of these programs, for me, it's not necessarily around cloud versus on-prem versus solution. It's about the problem we're trying to solve. So, and looking at what is the best way to solve the problem. So, we were talking earlier a bit about different data center, not data, and cloud providers and things. There's going to be cases where maybe AWS is better than Google, or Google is better than Azure or on-prem, and you have to choose the right case. In terms of, like, for example, data is expensive, bandwidth is expensive, and those kind of things. So I think there's a case of if you're starting small in many respects, building up, releasing value as quick as you can is important. And sort of modeling it through in the right kind of way. And I think it's choosing the right programs that you want to do, and not trying to do too much. There's a lot of work involved in making sure the org is ready to do this, and people are not necessarily naively jumping into it and thinking, not having that governance around it. So the governance is super, super important. If you're not educating people around the cost controls and things, and it won't always be cheaper to move into the cloud. It's about how quick you want to go as a business. So you might get more out of the ecosystem that the cloud offers. So therefore you can leverage more sort of capabilities and all those kind of things, right? So I think people who think cloud is cheaper, I think it is pretty cheap to use. But then when you start consuming bandwidth and data in the wrong kind of way, so it's not. I wouldn't necessarily treat it as a cost-saving idea. But what we've done in our business is we're able to we've broken our teams up into what we call sort of domain-based, cell-based architecture teams. And the idea for us is each team will eventually have like a mini P&L. So we know how much it costs the team, we know how much it costs the product, we know how much it costs them to run. Whereas a shared data center is much, much harder to do that. So we can make better commercial decisions on it over time in terms of, is that the right thing for us to be using? So my guidance here is that build the relationship with the finance teams. It's going to take time to predict it. You probably want to be a bit toppy on your prediction to start with, because it'll just, when I say toppy is, you might use the AWS calculator for your cost, but be realistic on the burst size, not the smallest size, because effectively you can't pull the budget back once you've blown it. And then just be really, really mindful about how you control the costs and regularly watch them, review them, maybe work with some tools that do cost analysis and stuff as well. So, so I've said a lot there. I'm going to leave Matt to probably jump in here as well, and Angela. So over to one of yourselves for your thoughts.
Angela, do you want to go first? Because I'm reckoning that you've been involved in some business cases along the way here for cloud for our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll probably just underscore what Gavin said, but it's absolutely imperative that you understand what your cloud strategy is and that you set that vision up front. And what we find to be most successful is setting that strategy, understanding what that business case is, because oftentimes the most successful ones, it's not around cost, it's really around the benefits around that and how that ties with your company strategy. So the very most successful transformations that I've seen is not where they've been, you're just kind of trying to move a few things and seeing where that's going to get you some extra leverage. But when you actually look at your company strategy and seeing how cloud can actually be a major lever to push you forward and to actually accelerate some of what you're trying to do. And that's where it becomes this driver to actually move a bigger portion of your organization towards the cloud and being able to actually see the benefits of accelerating what you're doing. So really understanding what that strategy is tied to your company strategy and setting that vision up front is critical to making sure that everybody's aligned to the why. And then it becomes less of a question around budget and it becomes more a question around prioritization.
Yeah, okay. We've got about a minute left. Matthew, is there anything else that you might add into that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just summary points from what Gavin and Angela's already said, perhaps. I mean, I think, first of all, Gavin alluded to something which I certainly really agree with, which is I think businesses don't buy cloud per se, they buy business outcomes. So, you know, that's the way to get a business to do something. It's like sell them on the business outcome. And then my other big point would be, that I think it's sometimes easier to sell cost saving, even though that's not what happens. So we're in data. A lot of people will have an on-prem traditional data warehouse appliance. Maybe that costs $5 million a year to run. And you can do the exact same thing that it used to do, or it does today, in the cloud for $1 million. So that's how you go and sell it to the business. But in reality, you end up spending $5 million in the cloud and you just do 25 times more stuff. Just like if you gave a chef a food processor, he can now go faster than when he had a knife. He doesn't just knock off at 10 a.m. He just spends the time cooking better food, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that analogy. So BTEC, you know, we've talked about this from a transformation standpoint and from an organizational standpoint. I was speaking recently to a client of ours, actually, to the procurement team, and one of the things that they were sharing with me was the fact that they had squads, they sort of had pods, they had tribes, but they really weren't sure if it was actually working for them in the way that they wanted. So I suppose my next question then to you guys is, you know, how much change do organizations really need to go through to successfully adopt the cloud? I know, Matt, we talked earlier on about being able to take those transferable skills, but I suppose what I'm looking for is a little bit more around what culturally as well do an organization needs to consider when we move into the cloud. And Angela, I'll start with you if that's okay, because I know we've touched on this certainly within the Slalom network. We talk about this quite regularly, that whole point about that organizational culture underneath the governance. What have you seen out in the market?
Yeah, so I mean, it obviously depends first on kind of how all in you are, and it also depends on where you are in the organization. But even from the business standpoint, just having that different mindset, you know, in the old days, you were limited by, you know, technology and access, and just kind of as you move to the cloud, having those limitations removed, but and also understanding kind of impacts as well as what that means. But when it actually gets into more of your technology organization, that's where it's really important to understand that the mind shift isn't just about the technology and the cloud, but the mind shift in to be the most successful is the mind shift to understand about being more product centric, being more customer centric, and being more tied to those business outcomes. You know, what Matthew mentioned earlier of that's kind of the business driver of going to that. So that means that we need to change the way we think and the way we work and the way we work together. So a lot less siloed of organizations, a lot less cross-functional of thinking about how do we actually achieve what our customers need, working across both infrastructure as well as your application teams and thinking across those boundaries, because there's no longer kind of those siloed boundaries anymore, because we can now integrate the amount of work you can do into more of those big cross-functional teams to drive towards those outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose with that comes then the challenges that you get between different departments, different ways of working, and different drivers. Gavin, how did it work for you guys when you embarked on this journey? And do you feel like you've managed to get through that, or were you already there in the first place?
So I think my advice on change here is that, you know, we had this analogy because, you know, booking.com transport is around car rental. You know, changing the wheels on a moving car, right, is, you know, it's quite an interesting analogy, right? But I think we have to be mindful about how much change you do in the organization at once. So just moving, so you referenced earlier about tribes and Scrum, and people might use the Spotify model, all those kind of, that's got nothing to do with the cloud in some respects. That is an operating model of teams. You can do that without the cloud and so forth. I think you just need to manage the amount of change that is sustainable within your organization and set yourselves up for change. And you know, what we've done, I mean, the way we sort of adopted a lot of our replatforming and shift to the cloud was that I spent a lot of time, first of all, giving ourselves a bit of air cover. So when I first started in business 5 years ago, we had a lot of failures. We had a lot of things like outages. We don't really have those anymore. So you give yourself the bandwidth for the trust. I mean, I was talking about finance before and trust and things as well. So you kind of get your estate under control. We've then done a lot of work to organize ourselves into product teams and agile teams and all those kind of things, because I felt quite strongly that the organization needs to be set up with the right structure so that people buy in. When you re-platform something and rebuild it, whether it's modernizing to cloud, people need to feel like they own it. If you rebuild it and then give it to somebody rebuilt, they'll want to rebuild it again. It's just a natural ownership thing in many respects. Not always the case, but a lot of the case it happens where people want to either change it to really suit. So we've organized the people and the teams around it first, which is probably the first 18 months of sort of transforming our business and so forth. And then we really laid into sort of getting into the cloud and some of the behaviors. And we were still doing some prototyping and still some work on the cloud. But I think the challenge, all that is, you do as much change as you need, but don't get it out of control, and try to set yourself up for success. Try to have sort of, some of the principles, mission and vision of what you're trying to do. So for example, in transport, things like I have a statement like cloud first, right? We build everything cloud first. Now that doesn't mean it has to go public cloud. It could go on-prem cloud, but those kind of things are the mantra of how we do stuff. And then you set the tone around the organization. And then you have some metrics. We have metrics around, evolution over the years on engineering maturity, team maturity, ways of working. So we know we're making progress. You got to check you're making progress, because chaos isn't very helpful.
No. No. And lastly then to you, Matthew, you've built a highly successful organization focusing on the development and build out of technology products which are going to get used by your customers. You've probably got a lot to share in that area as well.
Yeah, and I think from a slightly different angle, because unlike Gavin and Angela, I've not taken an organization from being a business that does something else and IT is a facilitator through to continuing to do that other thing, and now technology is delivered via the cloud. But the angle I was going to go for, Martin, was a cultural one, which I think is relevant both for us as a technology company, for a hyperscaler like AWS or Azure in their businesses, and also for a company on a cloud journey. And I was just trying to think as Gavin and Angela were talking, like how best to encapsulate it in a moment. And I think for me, the thing is that what the cloud gives you is this ability to innovate, right? You can build limitlessly sophisticated, limitlessly scalable stuff without fear or impediment, right? And that's new. You've never been able to do that before. You could log on now with your Amex and your laptop and combine huge volumes of data with AI and ML and loads of other cool stuff, and that's just in my little niche of it. And you've never been able to do that before. So culturally, you need to build an environment that supports that, right? You don't want to be like this kind of top-down dictatorial organization. You need to, in my opinion at least, be fostering innovation, bringing on the right sort of talent, giving them an environment to succeed. And that's everything from the type of people that you hire, the values and culture that you give them to work in, how you build out the offices that they sit in, all that stuff to kind of juice innovation. Cloud gives you the tools, but unless you use them, it's no use. And so using them, I think, is about culture. That would be my comment.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Matthew. I'm just looking at the clock and realizing that we're very quickly running out of time. Actually, I could talk for a lot longer. So, listen, I was going to wrap up with just basically asking you guys one sort of single piece. I know there's a lot of answers that we've had in here, but if you could just give one piece of advice, your one elevator piece of advice to someone in the middle of a cloud transformation, what would that be? So, Gavin, I'll come to you first.
Question. So I would go back to the whole piece around sort of change and trying to do too much at once. So I think for me is taking on the cloud, what's your purpose, what's your goal, and just making sure that you're not trying to do too much all at once, and just being really clear on the outcome. Not doing infrastructure. This is not an infrastructure DC replacement program, but you know what you're trying to do.
Yeah, brilliant. Matthew, what about you?
Yeah, macro level, I wouldn't see it as optional or a state change. I just see it as an inevitability, right? And so getting that frame of mind, if you sat there thinking, should I do cloud? You know, that moment's passed. Micro, practical, implementable advice, I would develop a great muscle in your business to run resonant proof of concepts. You know, come up with a way of saying, we want to try this out. How do I do a proof of concept? These are my 8 steps in the team I'm going to deploy to it.
Brilliant. And Angela, what would you say in adding and building on those?
Yeah, I would say, you know, when you're in the middle of the transformation, any transformation, you can get lost in kind of what you're doing. It's always important to keep in mind what that vision was to stand out, and to kind of going back to what Gavin's saying of making sure that you're doing change for the sake of an outcome and not just for the sake of change, but that there's actually a driver. And as you're looking at what that vision is and making sure that you're still tied to that, also having that measurements along the way, making sure that you're tracking your progress and keeping that in mind, that's critical, because that's how you're determining if you're continuing to stay on the right track, as well as if you're really achieving those outcomes that you thought that you wanted to start out with. So making sure that you're continuing just tracking how you're doing and measuring that, it's definitely important, especially in that middle of that transformation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, listen, I don't want to dive into another set of questions in case we start running over time, but I think, you know, if I reflect back on the conversation that we've just had, first of all, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to you all. And I know Angela, it's some silly time in the morning over there and on the West Coast, and for Matthew and Gavin to join us today. It sounded like to me then that when we go through these transformations, the words that came through quite a lot were trust. And it's a trust between teams, it's a trust between you and understanding what your customer wants, and understanding how that fits within governance, right? So there is a level of governance, there is a level of control, but with that, we're saying don't do too much, right? So take small chunks at a time. We want to foster innovation, and so we're encouraging people to move forward with things like their POCs, MVPs, but keep it outcome based, right? So don't be thinking about boiling the ocean or just using cloud to, you know, whether it's a solution looking for a problem. Look for that. As organizations, we're making it safer to be able to use cloud at the moment, but I think what we need to do is, unless we're using it right and unless we're using some of these themes that we've talked about, we're not going to be getting the type of return on investment that we wanted, you know, when we begun this, and we're not taking advantage of it in the way that we might like. So again, I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody. You'll know that we've talked about business transformation enabled by the cloud. At Slalom, really what we've been doing is just bringing together a whole host of stories and a whole host of things so that you don't have to. So if you've got questions related to this and would like to know some more, then clearly reach out to the Slalom team. We'd be really happy to do that. And actually, I'd like to thank Gavin and Matthew, because they've both said that if you would like to reach out to them to find out more about their journey, you know, without me in the room or anybody else, then please get in touch with us as well, and we'll be able to make that happen. Again, panelists, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody who's joined us today for the Slalom BTEC Lean Coffee. Great conversation, really enjoyed it. Take care and bye for now.